Okay, so what we're going to look at now is if we remember when we had the like a G protein up in the cell membrane, plasma membrane protein receptor, and if we use the example of epinephrine, and epinephrine is the ligand and attaches here. Now epinephrine is going to be used in the fight or flight response, and it's going to help you survive stressful events. Okay, so let's look at, there's a different video talking about cyclic AMP as a second messenger. What we're going to focus on now, though, is how do we get the message, the first one, the protein-based hormone, epinephrine, cannot cross through the cell membrane. And that hormone is a first messenger. It's sending the message to the cell. And now, though, we have to bring about a cell response. So there has to be relay proteins. There has to be relay molecules that pass the message on. So while the epinephrine was the first messenger, the cyclic AMP was the second messenger. And now we're going to look at, what happens in the cell. So once cyclic AMP has activated that first protein kinase A, we're going to look at what is like a hypothetical signal transduction pathway in this little video. So once it becomes active, remember it's a kinase, and kinases transfer phosphate groups. So here, protein kinase A is actually going to take a phosphate off of ATP, so it can imagine hydrolyzing ATP into ADP and a phosphate. And they're going to attach that phosphate to protein kinase 2. Now, the cool thing here is that phosphate is interacting with polar or charged amino acids. So when it interacts with that protein kinase 2, it actually causes a conformational change in shape. And now that protein kinase 2 is in its active form. And now that protein kinase can then catalyze the transfer of phosphate groups. It can take a phosphate group off of ATP and then transfer that to another protein kinase 3. And again, that phosphate group is going to interact with polar or charged amino acids, causing a shape change to that protein. And now that protein is in its active form. So you can see here the protein kinases, they take a phosphate off of ATP, they hydrolyze ATP, transfer the phosphate to a kinase that was inactive. When the phosphate is attached, it leads to a change in shape, a conformational change, and now that kinase is active. Now, when we reach the end of this is called a phosphorylation cascade. Think about a cascade like a waterfall, like a series of flowing down. And so here we call this, there's two names, a signal transduction pathway, or we can reference it as a phosphorylation cascade. And so when we get to the end of this phosphorylation cascade, we get to the end of this signal transduction pathway, and we need to bring about a cell response. In the example using epinephrine, here we have an inactive protein, and if we have protein kinase 3 transfer phosphate group and activate that protein, well now this protein may be an enzyme that has now just become activated. And if you remember that we have glycogen stored in our cells, like in our liver and our muscle cells, so glycogen is a chain of glucose molecules. And it would make sense that in the fight or flight response, this active protein maybe is an enzyme that then's going to go do hydrolysis and break the bonds of that glycogen molecule, increasing blood sugar. So in this example, the cell response is to increase blood sugar to make sure you have enough energy in that fight or flight response. Okay, so to summarize, a phosphorylation cascade or a signal transduction pathway uses relay molecules to pass the message on from the first messenger to the second messenger and then down the cascade to bring about a cell response. And these relay molecules that we're dealing with oftentimes are protein kinases, and the protein kinases, when they are active, they are able to transfer phosphate groups to the next protein kinase. And when they become active, you can tell they're active because of that conformational change in shape. And that's how the signal transduction pathway works.